weather.
That's great. Enjoy it.
Thank you.
So do you want me to show the video? Should I just take hands of who hasn't seen it and I'll send it to them? What do you think, Rabbi?
I think maybe just send it. I mean, I'd like Estelle to see it.
So I just sent it to Estelle and to Tova and to Ruth. Was there someone else? Ruby and Steve. Oh, okay. If there are so many people, if it's half the class, let's play it.
Okay.
Okay. And apologies to those who have seen it. I personally have seen it more than once and it was still powerful. Let me see. Oh, I think I have to do this another way. 1 second. Okay, I have to share sound. Sorry, just thinking out loud here. Ba-da-ba-dum. 1 second. Here we go.
Looking at it, everyone, this so much reminds me of the Soviet Jewry movement. And Netta and Ori, Netta and Ari, that was a movement that was led by students. It was the students who were indefatigable. Students like yourself who were relentless. They just didn't give up. Marching and marching and marching. In the spirit of the Navi Yeshayahu, he says that in the time of redemption, the Nahar Noheg Otam, and young people are going to lead the way. And so thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you to all of you, especially the young people and those in baby carriages. Kol hakavod lachem. This really is a movement, and it's a movement that at the end is going to be victorious. As we were singing Achenu Kovet Israel, I was thinking, and I know you all were thinking, of what we know is unfolding there. The inhumanity, the barbarism, the savagery, reading testimony today of how women were forced to stand without their clothes in a forceful way, abused. Goodness sakes, I call out to the world, we call out to the world. We call out to political leaders. Yes, God, I call out to you. Ad matai. When will this stop? When will it end? When will they be free? In the Soviet Jewry movement, a movement where Jews were not permitted to live as Jews in the former Soviet Union or to leave the Soviet Union and practice their religion or their Jewish identity. There were leaders in that movement who were imprisoned. Joseph Mendelevich, Ida Nudel, Edward Kuznetsov, Boris Kocherbayevsky, Natan Sharansky, and seeing what happened to Navalny, who was murdered by Putin. These men and women were in the same place and they could have easily been murdered. What heroes. But even then, at least we knew who they were. We knew their names. We knew who was alive. We knew who was dead. At least then, they were permitted one letter a year. At least then, Natan Sharansky's mother, Ina Milgram, would travel hundreds of miles to see her son. They were hostages in a very real way. They were kidnapped. And today, these butchers, these Nazis, they won't even announce who is alive and who is dead. As one mother of a hostage said to us, "I'd rather know my son is dead than continue living in limbo, not knowing if he's alive or if he's dead." And so the imperative to speak out with moral conscience, with Jewish conscience, against these barbarians, against Hamas. The brunt of our protest is not the Israeli government. Whoever that government may be, right, left, up, down, I believe they care. Whoever it may be, the culprits and those who are doing what they're doing is Hamas. And in our Torah there is a sentence, Lo tamod adam re'echa, that if the world sees this and is quiet, then the world is complicit. Yes, we dare not give Hamas a pass. They are the culprits. And from this monument, which is dedicated to American soldiers who gave their lives, we call out to the powers to be, wherever they may be, here in Europe, all over the world. Speak truth to power. Speak truth to power. Your politics can be your politics, but hostages, brutalizing women, Me Too, except if you're a Jew, the Red Cross, where the hell is the Red Cross? Who wouldn't allow Magen David under their ambit? Real anti-Semitism. Now when we need you most, don't run! You should be knocking on the doors of those tunnels and insisting in the name of justice, in the name of what is right. We want to get in there and make sure that the hostages are being cared for. This place, with a heavy heart, as one who is allied myself in human rights with my black brothers and sisters, with my Hispanic sisters and brothers, with Asian brothers and sisters, with people of different faiths. From here, I call out, in the name of humanity, in the name of decency, in the name of God, join us. Stand up with us. We are one. As you overcame, and we marched with you, and our commitment was and is unconditional. We need you now to march with us. And I believe, because of that alliance, one of our songs of connection must be, we will overcome. We will overcome because we must overcome. The hostages are crying out to the world, and we urging everyone, never be silent. Never be silent. And so let's pause. Let's think of Hirsch. Let's think of Noah. Let's think of Idan. Idan, a lone soldier, an American, a lone soldier who from high school through Garin Sabah served. And now he's a hostage. Let's think of them and resolve in our hearts and souls, whatever we're doing, we're going to do more. We're going to try to bring hundreds of people next week and the week after following Neta and Ari. God bless you. Let's pause for a moment of hitbodedut, a moment of deep introspection, and prayer to God that they be freed, that their families be at peace, they be able to embrace and hug each other in love.
Okay, so let's try to learn a little bit. And what I'd like to discuss is why it's hard to make a transition just
I was just gonna say I also need a transition. So I'm sure others are feeling the same.
if somebody wants to say something so I can catch my breath.
Oh, sorry. Tova, I think you're saying something and you're muted. I had to mute everyone for the video.
Rav Avi, there's a YCT board meeting tomorrow night, and I was asked to give the Dvar Torah to start. Could I use your Al Tamod Al Dam Vayakhel? Do you think that would be appropriate?
Yeah, I do. Whatever you say will be beautiful, Toba, but that's especially appropriate. Yep. Let me try to take a shot at it. So let's begin. When one looks at the Torah, there are 54 portions in the 5 books of Moses. One can't help but notice that there are no fewer than 7 portions. 7 out of the 54 are dedicated to the building of the tabernacle and the korbanot, the sacrificial service that's offered there. And one wonders why the Torah spends so much time, so many columns detailing how the temple was commanded and then built, and how the sacrifices and all of their intricacies, and it's intricate how they were offered. Especially as we're getting into the portions we're reading this week and next week, Vayakhel, Pikude. Generally, those portions are read together, but whenever there's a leap year, and this year there's an Adar Aleph and Adar Bet, they are read apart. These 2 portions, at first blush, seem very unnecessary. Already in the portion of Truma, there is the command to build, to construct the tabernacle in detail. So why this week's portion, which just reviews and says that that's exactly what we did? And it again mentions it in detail. Why didn't it just say, And the Jews did as they were commanded, and they built the Mishkan. No, that's not what it says. It describes what we did, and it takes basically the verbiage of Truma, and it just transfers it to Vayakhel. And they did. This is the way they built the ark in its detail: 3 boxes, wood, gold, whatever it is. The shulchan, the table, the showbread table, the menorah. And Tetzaveh, which is the portion after Truma, details what as we discussed last week, or 2 weeks ago, what the big day kahuna looked like, what the priestly garments looked like. So why is it necessary that next week we have an entire portion that discusses and says that we did as God commanded, but it then proceeds to say and to repeat exactly what we did, and we did what God asked us to do precisely. Why so much time is spent on this detail? And it's especially troublesome, and we've been studying together for a long time, when one considers the dearth of biblical verses on arguably much more relevant subjects. Often there's a narrative, and we really don't know what's happening. It's written elliptically, or there should be much more said about particular ethical principles that seem to be reviewed very, very carefully, or rituals. So why in detail? Now, the kernel of this thought I heard from my dear, dear friend, Rabbi Shalom, Rabbi Saul Berman, who was really one of the greats of our generation. And while the specifics and its details may not be his, and I'm not sure he would agree with everything that I would say, but the general foundational idea is his, and I'm very grateful to him. He should be well for many, many years to come. The argument is, the basic argument is to recognize that when there is discussion about the Kohen was the priest. They were priests, and then they were high priests. Now, the priest, of course, ministered in the Mishkan, and the priest wore those majestic garments. There were garments that the high priest wore. There were garments, 8 garments. There was the 4 garments that the regular priest wore, and then it's the priests in the tabernacle who offered the sacrificial service. And I know this is foreign to us, but that's the way it was in ancient times. But when one looks at that, especially the imagery of the priest, one can't help but recognize that there is a common denominator. And the common denominator is that the power of the Kohen, the power of the priest and the high priest, but the power of the whole priestly clan is over and over limited. They were the ones in power. They were the ones with the authority. And it's precisely because they had that koach, precisely because they had that might, the Torah over and over puts out there that their power was limited. Let me give you a few examples. Whereas each tribe had land, the Benjaminites had their land, the tribe of Judah had its land, the tribe, to this day, Estelle, you know this, that in Israel, to this day, when they talk about Gush Dan, the section of Dan, which is Tel Aviv, well, that's really where the tribe of Dan lived. That was their section. To this day, it's called Gush Dan. Or when they say Binyamin, Binyamin is north of Jerusalem. To this day, when there is something that happens north of Jerusalem, they call it on Kol Yisrael, on TV and radio and the newspapers, it's Binyamin. That's why Menachem Begin took great exception and said, I will not call Samaria and Judea Yehuda. I am not going to call it. I'm not going to call it the West Bank. That's Judea. Our children living in Efrat, which is south of Jerusalem, in Gush Etzion, that's Judea. To this day, we use that terminology. There is only one group within the tribe that had no land whatsoever, and that is the Kohen, the priestly clan. Now, the priestly clan, the Kohen, they're really part of the Levites, and even the Levites didn't have one contiguous section where they lived like every other tribe. The Arei HaLeviim, the cities of the Levites, were spread out everywhere. There were many of those cities, but they were not together. That's a limitation within itself. And the Kohen who is within the tribe of Levites, they would live all over the place. They could own maybe their home, but it was very, very, very limited. Unlike, for example, if we take a look at Genesis 47:22, when Joseph was dealing with the Egyptian priests and he was trading food for the land of the Egyptians, when it came to the priests, Genesis chapter 47:22, what's very, very clear from that text is that Joseph never acquires land belonging to the Egyptian priests as he prepares for the years of famine. Their title to real estate was inviolate. Rak admat hakohanim lo kana. Only the land of the priests he did not take over. In other words, they owned land. In contrast, Jewish priests were always to remain basically landless, making boundaries over their material wealth. They were limited. They could really not become real estate moguls, whatever the word is. They could not be real estate powerful. You would think that they would take all the land, as in ancient history. I'm so sorry Lori is not here. She could probably, I know, give us chapter and verse of Egyptian land that the priests owned. We could not do that. That's number one. Number two, in the book of Exodus, which we're reading now, and especially in the portions that we're reading now, there is a discussion of the clothes of the high priests. Now, the clothes of the high priest also conveys the message of the limitation. Around the head of the high priest is what's called the tzitz. The tzitz is a plate of pure gold, and upon it, it was written, Kodesh Lashem, holy to the Lord. Here it is. Vayasu et tzitz nezer hakodesh zahav tahor. It was sort of like the phylacteries, the tefillin shorosh, that the Kohen had around his head. They made the frontlets for the holy diadem of pure gold, vayichtavu alav michtav pituche chotam, and incised upon it the seal, the inscription. What did it say? Kodesh Ladonai, holy, holy to Hashem. Thus, the priest, and this is the high priest, is setting the example for all priests, and that we be constantly reminded, the priest be constantly reminded that whatever the power of the priest, it emerges from the Almighty. It's not the priest who's powerful. The priest is beholden to God. A third example, a priest, a regular priest, according to Jewish law, and this is not an easy law, is not permitted to marry by biblical law, a divorcee, can marry a widow, but the high priest cannot. But The regular Kohen can marry a widow, but cannot marry a divorcee. Here it is. Isha zona v'chalala lo yikachu. The isha grusha mi isha, and a divorcee lo yikchu ki kadoshu leloha. If I could face everyone, I always wondered about that. Why can't a priest marry a convert or a divorcee? So I'd like to argue as follows, that as a religious leader, the Kohen in times past may have counseled women who were married or women who were seeking to convert. Is it possible, perhaps, can it be suggested that the prohibition against marrying these women helped keep that interaction pure? That the counseling never lead to a personal relationship. I know at Ahavah Torat at Marat, we spend hours in leadership sessions and pastoral psychology on boundaries that rabbis, women and men, must make, especially important in whatever the rabbinate may be, whether it be on campus, and synagogues and organizations. Now, that's not a simple law. It's not a simple law. What happens if there is a young man who's not married until he's in his 30s or 40s or 50s? To say you can't marry and divorcee if this man is a Kohen, it's very, very, very difficult. I don't argue with that. And certainly the law about not marrying a convert, it's not specifically in the text, but the Talmud, and it says, I'll share it with you very openly, even though it's very difficult for me to even say this, they understand that when it says zonah, that is a woman, could have been a man, but they're talking about a woman who acts inappropriately, sexually inappropriately, and so they interpret that to be a convert. It's very hard for me to hear that. Very hard. One of the hardest laws. I'm not here to try to explain that. I'm not sure I can explain it. But what I'm here to say that bigadol, the concept of not marrying a divorcee or a Kohen who would be counseling women, who would be counseling potential converts, just with this perspective, I offer it for your consideration. And finally, a beautiful Gemara, which says it all. So let's take a look at the Gemara. It's in Brachot. This is a fascinating Gemara, Brachot 34a and b. And I'm going to go just for a few more minutes. By 11 o'clock, I'll be through and we'll open it up. Here's what it says. Tanu Rabbanan, our sages taught, this is a Tosefta, Elu brachot she'adam shoche bahem. We're praying the Shmona Esrei. We're praying the Amidah, where we try to stand when we say this. And it continues, if we can point to the place, Shuli. I'm so grateful to Shuli for everything. These are the blessings in the Amidah prayer in which a person bows. In the first blessing, the blessing of the patriarch, one bows at the beginning and at the end. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avoteinu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak ve'Yaakov, and then it ends Baruch atah Adonai Magen Avraham. That's two bows. In the blessing of thanksgiving, Modim, that's towards the end. Modim anachnu lach, one bows at the beginning and at the end. One bows at the beginning of the blessing of Modim, and one bows at the end. Baruch atah Adonai hatov shimcha ulecha na'eh lahodot. So the average person bows. It's sort of a statement of submitting to God, but 4 times. And then it says, And if one seeks to bow at the end of each and every blessing, and at the beginning of each and every blessing, they teach him or her not to bow, so as not to go beyond the ordinance instituted by the sages. That's not in dark lettering because that's an interpretation. I think it's so that the person not have what's called Yehuda. Don't think you're such a holy person that you should bow so often. 4 times is enough. Now let's look at the next paragraph. This paragraph was said by Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi in the name of Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, in the name of Bar Kapara, at a time of plagiarism. Look how careful the Talmud is. He said it in this person's name, who said it in that person's name. The Talmud says, attributing what you heard from someone else is what will bring about redemption. Here's what it says. An ordinary person conducts himself as we said. And now the explanation repeats. He bows at the beginning and the end of the blessing of the patriarchs and thanksgiving, and is admonished if she or he seeks to bow at the beginning and end of the other blessings. But let's continue on the next page. Kohen Gadol, but it is appropriate for the high priest, B'sof kol bracha u'bracha. He should bow every single time. The Hamelach and the king, Tchilat kol bracha u'bracha, B'sof kol bracha u'bracha. And the king, who is even more powerful than the Kohen, must bow in the beginning and the end of the blessings. Now, this interpretation, let's take a look at it. Let's take a look at their line. It's not, as I look at it, look at the whole sentence there. This is because the more lofty one's status, the more important it is to demonstrate subservience to God. The greater the power, the greater we have to understand the limitations. Now, just think about this. Think about contemporary times. You know, presidents for 4 years, for 8 years, they don't have to open a door. Doors are always, when I walk out of this building and Nando, such a beautiful man, and Paul, they open doors for me. I say, you know, I'm so uncomfortable with you opening a door for me. I should open doors for you. But when you get to the level of the president, of that power, a senator, even a congressperson, you're so powerful. It's actually a nice gig. Air Force One, and wow, you're traveling, you've got 50 cars in front of you, 50 cars behind you, you've got a doctor near you, you've got a psychiatrist near you, everything. It can go to your head. Go to your head. So what do the rabbis say? Limitation. Everyone bows 4 times. Must be enough. And every blessing, all those middle blessings, the 13 middle blessings. Slach lanu avinu, baruch atah Hashem, chanuna mabel eslach. Re'einu avanyenu, baruch atah Hashem. No one else is bowing, but the Kohen is bowing. And the priest bows, the king bows, not only at the end, but in the beginning. That means the priest is going to bow in the Shmona Esrei. The high priest will bow, let's see how many times, about 18, 19 times. Now let's look at the next paragraph. I don't know if you have it. I don't know if I mentioned it to you, Shuli, but the next paragraph really takes it, oh my God. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani. So this rabbi says, and it's fascinating the way he attributes it, it was explained to me directly from Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi himself differently. An ordinary person bows.
Sorry, I'm trying to get it back.
No problem. I'll try to do it as best as I can. But an
Okay.
ordinary person bows 4 times. And the priest, I think, what does it say there? The priest bows, we said, at the end of every blessing. Okay. And the king bows in the beginning and remains bowed the whole time. In other words, we have a text here that is saying that the previous paragraph, I have a tradition, he says, that whoever said the previous paragraph said it in a more intense way. Not only does the priest or the king bow, but they remain bowed. Let's see if we can see there. Let's see what it says here. It's 34b, the second paragraph. Here it is. An ordinary person conducts himself as we said. A high priest bows at the beginning of each and every blessing. The king, once he is bowed at the beginning of the first blessing, does not rise until he concludes the blessing, as it is stated, and so on and so forth. It's really, I think it's just, it's a remarkable text. This, the priest and the high priest, in contrast to everyone else, bows so often in silent devotion. And the highest of priests, as we've said, who could easily be haughty, imperious in his lofty spiritual position, is reminded that he's not God, he's not almighty. He too has limitations and must constantly give homage to the Almighty. Those are examples of how the power of the priest is limited. And so here's what I'd like to suggest. Is it possible that in order to limit the Kohen and the Kohen Gadol, the priest and the high priest, one of the ways, a very important way, is to say that they did not have exclusive knowledge of the inner workings of the temple. You know, very often you get to such individuals, I know these issues are so complicated, it's for me, it's not for you. You know, in the world of activism, I'm a little bit offline now. Whenever I would hear people say, trust me, I once wrote a piece, never trust those who say, trust us. When you hear people say, I remember when they imprisoned 13 young men in Iran, and the establishment was saying, no rallies. We know, trust us. We know what's happening behind the scenes. If you rally, you'll make it worse. Well, they didn't know what was happening behind the scenes, and not protesting would make it worse. Never trust those who say, trust us. And we've seen the movies, whatever their names of these priests, and they have the knowledge. In all sectors, in all types of clans, the Buddhist clergy, the clergy, they have knowledge that no one else has. Is it possible that the way the temple was built and the clothes of the high priest, the way they were made, it's out there for everyone to see, so that the knowledge of where the priest was working or what the priest wore was not only his, it belonged to everyone. Here's the way I put it. The Kohen and Kohen Gadol were also limited, as they did not have exclusive knowledge of the inner workings of the temple, the sacrificial, or even the garments they wore. These were not their domain alone. They belonged to the people. If we can look at 142, 2 paragraphs from the bottom. Thus, page 142.
It seems like this version I'm looking at has a different page.
What page is it?
No.
142, surely.
No, this is 142 right here.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, so I think it's not the right page.
Okay, one second. I'll get you the right page.
Which piece is it? Oh, here we go. It must be this.
Yes. Go down a little bit. Yeah. This is an earlier. This book went through so many Gilgulim. Go down a little bit further, please. Oh, no, that's not it either. It's called Details Give Us Equal Access to the Divine.
Got it.
It's the first one of the next portion, but
Okay.
it's equally applicable to this portion. I'm sorry. I'll just read it.
Yeah, I got it.
It's 141.
Okay,
Yeah,
let's
that's
go down
right.
a little bit. So here it is, 142. Thank you, Elaine. Let's go down. Here it is. Thus, do you see it there, Shuli?
Yeah,
Two
right here.
paragraphs. Thus, Rabbi Saul Berman argues the details of the tabernacle and sacrifice are so elaborate. Precise detail in these sections forces the Kohen to be accountable to the people. If the Jewish priests deviated in any way from the norm, the common folk, employing the text explicitly spelled out in the Torah, could challenge them. And we conclude, unlike the ancient codes and even contemporary forms of law, which give advantage to the powerful, our system makes no such distinction. The Jewish priests could not claim to have special hidden knowledge of how to reach God. It was all outlined meticulously in the text. All have access to the divine. If I can face everyone, it's a beautiful story about, this happened so long ago. There's a difference between history and stories, but this is the story as I remember it, where someone said to me that there's in the old Bayit, that there's an elderly lady. I don't know what that means anymore. I'm sure. Then I thought the person was elderly. Now I wouldn't. But she's in front of the ark and she's babbling. She's babbling that she needs help, or could I go in and take a look? So I go in, and sure enough, there's a woman standing there, and the curtain of the ark is open, and the doors are open, and I could hear her talking. She says, God, I know I bothered you weeks ago, but I'm still in need. My son is still not well. And I saw she was deep in prayer, so I stepped away. And so when I came back into the outer office, it was a long time ago, the chaver then asked, so what'd you do with the woman who was babbling? I said something like, this morning I got up, I washed my hands, put on my talis, put on my tefillin, put on my prayer shawl, I put on the tefillin, and I davened. That's the word for prayer. I davened. This woman, she was talking to God. You could be in prayer and not talk to God. Talking to God is not the domain of a rabbi. It's not the domain of just the Holy of Holies. Everyone has the capacity to so connect. This has really been a cornerstone of my rabbinate, that the rabbi doesn't, I know that there's controversy about this, but the rabbi doesn't sit up front. Everybody has access. Everyone. What do I know? What do I know? But what do you know? What do you know? So that's the thought. I thought that Rabbi Berman's concept was, but I'm especially interested to hear what Estelle thinks, because there's no doubt that Estelle buys into the whole Kohen idea, right, Estelle?
Well, I have a question.
Okay.
No,
My dear
look,
Estelle,
for
whom I
instance,
love.
All of these remarks are strictly for the male. Now, for instance, what if you're born into the Kohen family, but you're a woman? Does the woman have any special obligations? Is she not permitted to marry a convert or a divorcee or whatever, and all the other obligations that are given to the male Kohen. I know that the line doesn't go through the woman, but does the woman Kohen have obligations or can do, or is she completely ignored?
Right. It's the latter, for Haskell. I mean, there are in fully egalitarian places, which we're not. I don't think Jewish law is fully egalitarian, but in fully egalitarian places, I'm sure women do the priestly benediction as well. But in the Orthodox, even in the most open Orthodox tradition, the line doesn't go through the Kohen. Having said that, the line of being Jewish is also not balanced. That is to say, Judaism in Orthodoxy itself is matrilineal. If mother is Jewish, the child is Jewish. If the father is Jewish and the mother is not, the child is not. The model of Judaism is that roles are not identical. I would say that in 95% of the areas, what a man can do, a woman can do, or what a woman can do, a man can do. But in 5% of the areas, there are distinctions, just as physically. Physically, a man and woman are by and large the same, but there are, of course, notwithstanding all that's going on, there are differences.
I mean, I'm aware that this started. I mean, after all, Moses' children were Jewish, really, no matter who. I mean, I realize this started way back, and it was decided that way. But I'm still concerned. After all, the women Kohanim were descendants, of which I am one, which is why I'm asking the question, because you're not giving me an answer. In other words, it's as if you didn't count. Is that right?
No, you do count. You count more than I count, Estelle.
That's not an answer.
Right.
I meant an official answer.
I don't have an answer. And I would say, by the way, that the modern expression of the king, it's not a king, would be, let's say, the president, the executive head, or the prime minister. Now, there's never been a woman president in the United States. Never. And there's never been to my knowledge.
But that doesn't prohibit them.
Wait.
Whereas in Judaism, you're prohibiting.
No, what I'm saying, though, that in Judaism, maybe there couldn't be a queen, but there could be, halachically, there could be a woman prime minister. And in fact, Golda Meir was the head of the Israeli government way before most democracies in America.
We know that, but she wasn't a Kohen.
Right. In that area. So let's see how it'll evolve, Estelle. Yeah, let's see, 50 years from now, let's sit down for a coffee.
You mean you have hope for the future?
Yeah. Shh.
I see
Look,
Ellen's hand.
There are women, Estelle, there are women rabbis now. There were those who said they can't be rabbis because women can't be in positions of authority. It's called sorora.
Yes, but Kohanim are inherited.
Right.
I hate to say this, but my cousin, who is a Bat Kohen and a conservative rabbi, is a Kohen.
Yeah.
Well, so am I.
Right. But she acts as a Kohen, I guess is what I'm saying.
Okay.
Alan's hand is up. And you're muted, Alan.
I love what you have to say about why, where the power lies and where, and that this has to come from God and keep priests humble. Except that the irony is that what we follow is rabbinic Judaism. It's not, we follow what has been interpreted by, if not the priests, or I mean, the rabbis. I know rabbi means teacher and not priest, but in the end, we follow rabbinic Judaism. And there's an irony of that. In that somehow in the end, we did not give the power to the people. We gave the power to the rabbis.
But first, that's a very important point, and you very eloquently said it towards the end there, where you said you gave the power not in the hands of the people. I would argue that most change, most of the evolution of halacha has come not because of the rabbis, but because of the people. The people's impact, the people's lobbying, the people's insistence that there has to be changes. I'll give you the most glaring contemporary example, and that is, Ellen, you're familiar with the issue of the aguna, a woman who is chained. Now, what does that mean? It means that there was a time where a husband gives the get. Now, of course, a woman must also receive the get, but what happens if the husband is recalcitrant? That is, there'll be a civil divorce, but I'm not going to give you a get. Without his giving a get, the get can't be a get. Now, the rabbis were very silent on that for hundreds of years. Actually, it wasn't an issue, but it certainly the last 100 years when it became an issue in this particular way, the rabbis were mute. It was the women. It was JOFA, the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, that rose up and said, this is intolerable. This is unacceptable. And today there's a prenuptial agreement. And I've been involved now with Rabbi Yafa Epstein to draft another agreement that I think is ironclad to make sure that that doesn't happen. So the rabbis who introduced law, and they're not talking or not affected by the people, and that's not my style of the rabbinate. And I would add something else. Today, people, lay people who are not ordained, they're knowledgeable. They know Torah. Arnie knows a lot of Tanakh, knows a lot, and can teach me. So it's not only that we're making suggestions, we're learning the text. And in learning the text, we turn and say, here are the text, here are the solutions. So there are two models, I think, to understand how rabbinic law evolves. One is it evolves from the rabbis independent of the people they're talking to. And the other is that it really is hi Debbie, it's a commingling. It's a commingling. And that, think about on the women's issue again, women's prayer groups, where did that come from? Where did it come from? Where did Darchi Noam come from and Shir Chadash? Think about the movement in the Orthodox community that has been made on the gay issue. Were it up to the rabbis, we'd be in the Stone Age. Now there's an understanding. People are born in certain ways with certain sexual preferences. Just the other day, I sat down with a gay couple, with a young man with two men who are gay, and they're thinking about the rabbinate, and they're going to be ordained. We've made tremendous strides in all of these areas. Precisely, I would say that the rabbis who make the greatest strides are the ones who understand, I know something, but I don't know. I don't know. I want to, and I think that's the way it is in general. Here I've been talking too much, but the people who are, the smart people are the ones who listen, who don't jump in right away.
With all due respect, Avi, you and HIR and the Bayit are the anomaly, I think, at least in my experience in the Orthodox world.
Right.
I think there are very few Orthodox shuls where I would feel comfortable practicing and believing as a Jew. I think that I I think that you are the anomaly. And that saddens me.
That's why I don't have a clear answer for that, but that's why Chovevei and Maharat were created by just like
Right.
from a year from
and,
June.
and that is sort of what I mean. Yes, you're right.
Because in the end, no one person can do much. You need people who can go out there. My success now, it's not my success, it's the success of students who are going out who, frankly, they do it, I believe, much better than I can do it. It's their time. By next year with Marat and Chulve and the Bayit, there'll be 300 rabbis who will be out there. And that's not my doing. I just had an idea. That's the doing of Sarah Horowitz, of Rabbi Horowitz, of Rabbi Linzer. And I'm very proud of that. They are in communities all over the country, and maybe not in Teaneck, New Jersey, maybe not in the 5 towns. That's true. But in Riverdale, this philosophy has had a great impact. It's the philosophy of SAR, without a doubt, in its own way. It's the philosophy of the Bayit. It's the philosophy of the Kehillah. Rabbi Adina Naiman Licht has that openness. It's very, very acceptable here, very much so. If you look at the hottest place in Brooklyn, Prospect Heights, there's a Chovevei rabbi there. He's spreading the word, and that's the hope. Very proud of them. But I hear you, Ellen. Thank you. We'll take one more comment. Arnala.
So I think what you demonstrated this class is like a beacon of how to be, to guide, and you certainly like when you talked about stepping back as opposed to stepping down when you stop becoming the head of the shul. You lived what you teach, which is very inspiring. But there's always a but. In the hundreds of years of history of the priesthood and the high priest and kings, there were kings who lived outside of these precepts. There were certainly kings who were corrupt, and even priests who I'm sure in hundreds of years were less than great. And it's similar to the presidents of the United States. They're bound by the Constitution, but they push outside the boundaries sometimes and get away with it. So, and some are, corrupt in other ways, and some occasionally are not. So I'm just wondering what your thought is about that. Like historically, weren't there exceptions, many exceptions to the outline presented today?
Look, I think you're correct, Arnie. When you look at the priesthood, the Talmud tells us that, once you're a high priest, you're there for life. But in the Second Temple period, the high priesthood was so corrupt, people would buy it with money, that they had to be dismissed. And there were countless priests. They were going through constant changes. As a matter of fact, the Second Temple was an example of how the high priesthood should not work. And just to reinforce what you're saying, when one looks at the Book of Kings, Sefer Melachim, when one looks and reads the history of kings, it's a tragedy. It's a form of leadership that failed. And it remains to be seen how this evolves For example, Rabbi Cook, the first chief rabbi of Israel, he says, okay, we don't have any kings today, but in the absence of king, he said that the people will vote and they will decide who will head the state of Israel. He said this before there was a state of Israel. He died in 1935. So Arnie, he actually sees the Knesset and the prime minister as being the embodiment of the Jewish concept of kingship. It's not the kings. I would argue that didn't work. That's not what we're moving towards, I pray. There's really been movement in that arena. Now, of course, Rav Kook, whom I venerate, at that point, he was opposed to women's suffrage. I'd like to think that today, of course, he would say, I just know from everything I wrote, it's 1935, he said this. I'd like to think that, of course, women have to be part and parcel of this decision, and the democracy in Israel is very, very important. My father used to say when he went to Poland, Poland was communist, he said, yeah, and he met Jewish communists, met Jews who were communists. My father would say, una Yiddische communist, das is a communist. A Jewish communist, this is a communist. And I would
It's
say,
terrible.
una Yiddische politician, das is a politician. You see what's going on in Israel. My God almighty, it's out of control. Trying to figure out, they're still trying to figure out who should rule. The whole system there is so needs a lot of help. But a Yiddish politician, a Yiddish democracy, das is a democracy.
I
But I
so
think you're right
disagree
on.
with him.
Why, Estelle?
I just do. I think people are misled about certain beliefs, and I think that each one has to be taken apart. And I can't go into detail because it's just too vast.
Okay. We'll take one more comment and then we'll stop. It's getting late.
Do I see any other hands?
Oh, good. I used to sit in on, I was once a math major and I was studying complex variables. And there we had a professor, Dr. Karanye or something, very nice man. And he would say, any questions? I had no questions, not because I understood, but because it didn't make any sense. I hope I made some sense. Elaine, take care. I love you guys, and just be well. Take care, everybody.
Bye,
Love you.
everybody.
Thank you.